just wanted to make a quick video to explain how I'm using these 25 litre containers to build worm beds and worm towers. This is a kind of system I'm coming up with some ideas of my own, and largely it's based on Mark Thomas Payne's kind of fermenting buckets. So if you're not familiar with that concept, I'd suggest you check out his Facebook group, Eve Growing, and his YouTube channel. He's got some brilliant ideas on there. He uses 5-gallon buckets, but I found these locally available for free, so I'm just using these. I've used dozens of these containers for various applications around the allotment, and this is of course a kind of latest sort of rendition of how I'm using these. So I've cut the top of the container, and one of my videos explains how I make these. They're fairly straightforward to make, but there's a few different ideas and different tools and things that I use. So this is the basis of the system, and this is what I call a worm bed. So I dig a hole. This is around 400 millimeters deep. Dig the hole as far as you want to go. Work in a lot of wood chip for drainage, and obviously if the hole's wider, it's always easier to dig a hole a couple of spades width down, and then you can put part composted material or wood chip around there for drainage as well. The more organic matter, the more castings you're going to get, and the longer kind of long-term benefits you're going to get in terms of improving the soils. So one of the reasons I'm doing this is I live in London, and my allotment is in Muswell Hill, and if you're not familiar, Muswell Hill is actually glacial, and it's what's called glacial boulder clay. So if you're trying to work down into the soil and improve the soil, you've really got to start going upwards and kind of adding organic matter and building some compost on top. So that's really the main reason I'm got quite so heavily into composting. If I was on fairly friable soils, then I'd just use mulches each year, probably a couple of inches, but because I'm literally trying to build depth of soil, I'm working in lots and lots of organic material and brewer's waste and leaf litter and cardboard and hugelkultur and timber and things like this, as well as all the kitchen waste and used coffee grounds as well from different cafes and different sources as well. So there you go. So that's the basis of it. That's the worm bin. That goes into the soil. Nice bit of drainage underneath. I found that even in London clay, it's been particularly wet in the last few weeks. Serious amounts of rainfall. I've got a rain gauge that's up to about 2 inches already, just in the last few days. Even with all that rainfall, because you've got a huge amount of organic matter of depth of soil, if you have 2 inches of rain, that's going to be able to soak that and absorb that as it rains. You're not going to get localized flooding and waterlogging as you would with just a kind of compacted clay soil. So that's the worm bed part, and then this is, I think one of my videos is something similar, but this one's got holes in the base. So what I've sort of called, I haven't really got a name for this, so I call it like a baiting bucket, or a sort of feeding station. So if you imagine if that's set in the ground, and you could leave this in situ for maybe 6 months or something like that, once that's full of organic matter, the worms are going to work their way through that. The level will settle down as they use the material, and some of it will be lost in terms of moisture and carbon dioxide and other kind of volatile organic compounds, which you'll get as organic matter breaks down. So the level will reduce, but the idea of this is kind of like a lid. You can lift that off, and then as you get your kitchen scraps, I don't know, potato peelings, carrot peelings, banana skins or whatever, banana peels, kind of wrap that up, bit of newspaper around it, make a little parcel. What I do is I get a garden compost scoop, a couple of scoops of the kitchen scraps, and wrap it up in 2 or 3 sheets of newspaper, make a kind of parcel of about 4 inches square, a few inches thick, and then you just stack them on top. And you'll notice once this has been in the ground for a few months, the worms will start coming in on their own accord. They'll seek out the source of food. Also, there'll be a little bit of protection in there as well, because they're not going to get predated by birds, because they've got the lid on there. And there's an air pipe, which I haven't got on this one. I'm just making these. But anyhow, the little rolls of compost, the compost rolls, the worms will feed on that, so it's a food source, and then you can put partially composted material on there, and then that'd be like an extension of the worm of your compost bin. So this is like the baiting station. So what you can do with this, put it on top. Likewise, part composted material, even charcoal and things like that. If you want to activate charcoal to use as biochar, compost rolls in there, partially composted material, even stuff that you've sifted out from straining or sifting a kind of wormery, all that can go in here, so it's already inoculated. You've got all the kind of microbes and worms and cocoons in there as well to get it started. So then, even after a couple of days, what I've noticed is worms will start moving into this one, because as that's breaking down, there's food there, not quite as readily available. The mature worms are basically looking for somewhere to sort of colonise, so they'll seek out a good source of food in here. They'll leave this one down there for the little wisps and the cocoons, and they'll hatch out, and there'll be enough food for them. The bigger worms can fend for themselves, so they'll seek out the food elsewhere. So the idea is you basically pre-charge this wormery with worms just by sifting it onto the worm bed that's already in the ground. So once the worms are in here, and what you can do is you can maintain these as a wormery as you kind of see fit. So the idea of this, you can remove that one, and then I've made this it's almost like a sort of docking station for a mobile phone or something like that. So this is going to be a drainage sort of sump, because obviously on here you've just got the holes in the base, and I'm going to build this up the same as one of Mark Thomas Payne's basic grow buckets, and I've got a video on there where he's got a subfloor made out of these Coke cans, and then there'll be an overflow here. So likewise for using these to inoculate material and things like biochar, I'm thinking of having a filter of biochar on the base, which will be charcoal, which will be activated by any leachate that potentially drains out from the worm bin, and then the leachate which drains out will be kind of pre-filtered through all those layers, through the wormery, through any part of composted material in here, and then you've got that irrigation there, which can also wick back up into the container. So if you've got aeration there, you've got it's sort of irrigation. So it's in terms of worm composting, I kind of equate it to, if you've got the ideal conditions for growing plants, then you've also got the ideal conditions for worms. They don't want to be too wet, they don't want to be sitting in sloppy kind of mud, they want air as well. So a lot of plants, they'll want free draining, but they'll also want that level of water retention as well. So you've got the aeration, you've got the drainage, but then you've got a little bit of wicking as well. And I'll use lots of cardboard to line this. But the idea of this is, one thing that I've noticed is, as you go into autumn, winter, and the temperature drops down, there'll be less and less worm activity as it gets cooler. So what I'm doing with this is really using this as an outdoor wormery, so the worms have got their kind of natural conditions, and then you can just take those out and then move that from the outside worm bed into the polytunnel, and then they've got a little bit of heat, a little bit of insulation over winter, so you can kind of still raise worms and you can increase their numbers, and then all kind of going down deeper in the ground where the sort of soil temperatures are slightly warmer. So that's the concept. And what I've done here, I've put these nylon bolts through the base, so the idea is that it can stack, and that just makes a stop, so when you're sitting on there it's not going to push down and wedge in. And also with this one, this has got the lid on. My other kind of bins, they had an aeration vent and you could just stack those. But what I wanted to do is have those so it's continuous, so when the worms are in here, as the food on this one runs out, you can kind of use this as a stacking system as well. So the next bucket will be identical to that. And if you imagine this was a full-size bucket, that would just stack on top, and then you've got the bolts there just to stop it from compacting and pressing in. Because obviously once this is full, that's around about 25 litres, so it's not going to be far off 20 sort of kilos when it's full up. So that's the idea, and I've got to drill the holes on this one, but that was just as a sort of demonstration, like a little stand, just to show how this works. So it's just really, that is like a sump on the bottom layer of a kind of commercial wormery. But obviously with this one, if you put that on the ground, you get things like centipedes and slugs or whatever can actually get in there. I'm not too worried about that myself, but it just means it's it's got a little bit more sealed in from the elements, and it's more of a kind of little ecosystem of its own. So that's the sort of three parts of the system. That's I kind of want to call it like a docking station, because that's really what it is. And then that's the worm tower. That's the baiting. The two units together I'd call a worm tower, because it is tall. It's like a tower. This part here on its own is just the worm bed, or the worm bed container, and then this is the sort of baiting station. But as an extension of this, just to show how these can be quite useful, these containers. This one here, I've just cut the top off, and then I just use this as a storage bucket. And it's the same lid, it just sort of snaps in, and it's nice and stable, and it fits on. And this is got obviously it's a container, it's got loads of different uses, but things like perlite, vermiculite, they come in bags and they're kind of messy, and you've got to keep putting sort of bricks on top to keep the moisture out and things like that. So ideal for that sort of soil additives. Activated charcoal for like biochar, or even just a source of charcoal. So you've got 20 kilos, 25 litres there rather. If you've got like a Dalek compost bin, which is around about 300 litres, then a whole one of those full of crushed charcoal is perfect. So if you've got a charcoal retort set up, or you've got a source of buying charcoal in, if you can kind of have the materials to hand, then you know when you've got that compost bin number one biochar, you can make a little note of it, or even just do a blog or whatever, just kind of update it for your own reference, so you know what's going into those systems. The other thing as well, if you've got a compost bin, you've sifted out material, and you haven't got the space to put it down, you can just sort of fill one of these up. So you go, okay, there's part of compost material there. We've got some kitchen waste. I've made some compost rolls. I haven't got the wormery because it was raining. I didn't want to take the lid off or anything. You can have that food source there. But likewise with these, with the aeration as well, you've got aeration there, so that food's going to be okay in there. It hasn't got the worms eating it. It's not going to compost down, but it's not going to be any problems. It's not going to go anaerobic. So it's just like an extension of that sort of system. So I think that's quite good if you can have the materials at hand. And likewise, I mean, it's labour to make these things in the first place, but once you've got the worms in there, they're doing all the digging, they're all doing the turning, they're doing all the breaking down, and then all you've got to do is take that container out, tip it out on the soil. Because it's right by the worm bed, the worms will gravitate back towards the source of food. So tip that one out, put fresh material in there, it's good to go. So that's yeah, I'll probably have to come up with a name for this at some point, because it's just my own reference when I'm making videos. It's kind of awkward what you call these things. There's only been so many times you can say sort of 25 litre car wash containers in one video. But hopefully that sort of explained how the system works. It's a work in progress, so I mean things like just putting a sort of bolt on there so it can stand on the other container so they can be stacked. I wouldn't go more than 3 containers at all, or perhaps if you've got one as a worm bed you could go to 4 with the one buried in the base. So any questions, just post below. I'm a member on the Facebook group Worm Composting UK.